The whistle of the iron horse screamed a lonely song across the Dakota plains, a sound that promised new beginnings and final goodbyes. For Loretta Dunn, standing on the dusty platform of Redemption Creek, it was meant to be the former. She clutched her worn satchel, the paper with her instructions crinkled in her palm. He was supposed to be here. A man named Hawk, a rancher. Her future. When a tall, broad-shouldered man finally approached his shadow, falling long in the afternoon, sun relief washed over her. But he wasn't smiling. He wasn't holding flowers. He was holding a freight receipt, and the look in his dark, assessing eyes was one of profound confusion. He stopped before her, glanced from her face to his paper, and then back again. "Mum," he said, his voice flat as the plains around them. "You're not what I ordered." The steam engine hissed its final shuddering breath, a great metal beast settling into repose at the edge of civilization. Loretta Dunn felt a similar exhaustion settle deep in her bones. The journey from Ohio had been a rattling, clattering ordeal of endless horizons and the ceaseless rocking of the carriage. Now, standing on the splintered boards of the Redemption Creek station, the silence was almost as jarring. The air was thin and smelled of dust horse and something wild and clean she couldn't name. She smoothed the front of her grey travelling dress, a practical garment that had lost its crispness somewhere in Nebraska. She was not a woman given to flights of fancy. At 24, she was plain-faced, with sensible brown hair pulled into a severe bun, and hands that were more familiar with mending harnesses than arranging flowers. Her younger sister Rosalie had been the beauty, the one with the sky-blue eyes, and laughter like wind chimes. It was Rosalie's name on the correspondence, Rosalie's delicate photograph that had been sent ahead. But Rosalie had found a last-minute more appealing prospect in a travelling salesman, and had vanished 2 days before the train was set to depart, leaving Loretta to face the consequences of a promise made in desperation. Their father, a man broken by debt and drought, had simply looked at Loretta and said, "You'll have to go." The passages paid. So she had gone. She had packed her few belongings and her sister's lie and travelled west to meet a man she knew only from 3 short letters. His name was Hawk. He owned a ranch called Eagle's Rest. His letters were sparse, direct, and written in a surprisingly neat hand. He sought a wife to help build a life, a partner for the hard years ahead. He sounded steady, reliable. That was all Loretta had ever truly wanted. The last of the other passengers had been collected by family or had strode off toward the town's single dusty street. Loretta was alone. A knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. What if he wasn't coming? What if he'd changed his mind? Then she saw him. He emerged from the freight master's office, a tall figure silhouetted against the glaring sun. He moved with a quiet, deliberate grace that was at odds with the rough-hewn world around him. He wore sturdy denim trousers, a plain cotton shirt, and scuffed leather boots. His skin was the color of rich, sun-warmed earth, and his black hair was tied back at the nape of his neck with a simple leather thong. He was, she realized with a jolt, an Indian. Or part Indian, at least. The letters hadn't mentioned that. His face was starkly handsome, with high cheekbones and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. But it was his eyes that held her dark, intelligent, and currently narrowed in a look of intense concentration as he studied a piece of paper in his hand. He strode toward the platform, his gaze sweeping the area, before finally landing on her, the only person left. He stopped a few feet away, his presence creating a palpable sense of stillness. He was taller than she'd imagined, and broader. There was a power in his frame that spoke of hard, physical labor. "Mom," he asked. His voice was a low baritone, calm and devoid of any discernible accent. "Mr. Hawke, Loretta," replied her own voice, sounding thin and reedy to her ears. He nodded, once his eyes flicking from her face, down the length of her simple dress to her single satchel, and then back up. It wasn't a lecherous look, but an appraising one, the way a man might inspect a horse he was considering buying. He then glanced again at the paper in his hand, a freight manifest, and a deep line appeared between his brows. "There seems to be a mistake," he stated. It wasn't a question. Loretta's heart sank. "A mistake I am, Loretta. I mean, I am the woman from Ohio. The correspondence—" He held up a hand to stop her, not unkindly, but with an air of finality. He took a step closer, and she could smell the scent of leather and sagebrush on him. "I believe there has been a significant misunderstanding. I came to Redemption Creek to collect a shipment, item 734 on the manifest from the Union Pacific Line." He held out the paper. Loretta glanced at it, her mind reeling with confusion. It was a list of cargo of crates and barrels. I don't understand," she stammered. He drew a slow breath, his gaze direct and unwavering. "Ma'am," he said, his voice flat as the plains around them, "you're not what I ordered." The words hung in the dry air between them, sharp and incomprehensible. Loretta felt a hot flush of humiliation creep up her neck. Had he seen her plain face and immediately rejected her? Was this his cruel way of turning her away? "I beg your pardon," she whispered, the fight draining out of her. "I ordered a bull." He clarified his expression, unchanged. "A Hereford bull. For breeding. 2,000 pounds of prime stock from a farm just east of the Mississippi. The manifest says, 'Live cargo, special handling.' I believe the freight master, Mr. Abernathy, a man of limited imagination and even less competence, has confused my order with you." Loretta stared at him, dumbfounded. The world tilted on its axis. All the fear, the weeks of travel, the carefully constructed lies, the hope for a stable future, all of it collapsed into a single absurd moment. She wasn't a rejected bride. She was a clerical error. She was a misplaced piece of freight. A sound escaped her lips, a strangled combination of a gasp and a laugh. It was so utterly hopelessly ridiculous that the terror momentarily gave way to black humor. "A bull. The finest I could afford," Hawke said grimly. "Meant to be the foundation of my herd for the next decade." He looked past her toward the empty cattle car sitting on a siding, as if expecting a prize animal to materialize from thin air. The freight master, a portly, sweating man named Abernathy, chose that moment to bustle out of his office. "Everything in order. Hawke got your, delivery, I see." He gave Loretta a nervous, oily smile. Hawke turned his head slowly to face the man. The calm demeanor vanished, replaced by a cold fire that made Abernathy take an involuntary step back. Abernathy Hawke said, his voice dangerously low, "You and I need to have a conversation. It seems my bull has been misplaced, and in its place I have been delivered a woman." He gestured toward Loretta as if she were a crate of dry goods. "I find this to be an unsatisfactory transaction." Loretta, who had been buffeted by humiliation and confusion, felt a spark of anger ignite. She was not a transaction. She was not a misplaced parcel. She had been sent here, however deceitfully, with the promise of a life. She straightened her spine, lifting her chin. "Mr. Hawke," she said, her voice clear and steady now, "while I am as distressed by this mix-up as you are, I am not an it. My name is Loretta Dunn, and I have traveled over 1,000 miles based on a written agreement with you. An agreement for marriage." Hawke's gaze snapped back to her. The anger in his eyes was banked, replaced by a weary resignation. He looked at her, truly looked at her this time and seemed to see past the grey dress and the severe bun. He saw the fatigue etched around her eyes and the tremor of fury in her hands. "I made no such agreement," he said, his voice softer now. "The letters I answered were from a Miss Rosalie Dunn. The photograph I received was of another woman entirely." My sister Loretta admitted the truth, tasting like ash in her mouth. "She was unable to make the journey." "I see." He ran a hand over his jaw, the sound of it rough in the quiet. He looked from Loretta to the smirking Abernathy, then to the dusty street of the town, and finally back to her. He was trapped. She was trapped. They were two strangers bound together by a fool's error and a sister's cowardice, stranded on a platform in the middle of nowhere. The sun beat down, promising no easy answers. The Hereford bull was gone, and Loretta Dunn had arrived. The freight master's office was small and suffocating, thick with the smell of stale cigar smoke and spilled ink. Mr. Abernathy perched on his high stool like a nervous toad, shuffled through a mountain of paperwork, his face slick with sweat. Hawk stood with his arms crossed his large frame, seeming to shrink the room, his silence more intimidating than any shouting. Loretta sat stiffly on the only other chair, her hands folded in her lap, feeling the absurdity of her situation pressed down on her like a physical weight. "It's the blasted telegraph system," Abernathy finally blustered, waving a flimsy piece of paper. "Wires get crossed, messages get garbled. See here, the order from St. Louis for a mail-order bride. For one of the miners up in the hills, it must have gotten attached to your freight order, Hawk. The names, the destinations, a terrible mix-up." He offered a weak, apologetic smile that didn't reach his beady eyes. "So where is my bull?" Abernathy Hawk's voice was dangerously quiet. "Well, now that's the question, isn't it? Could be in Cheyenne, could be in Ogden, could be halfway to California by now. I'll send telegrams, we'll sort it. Might take a week. Maybe 2. A week. Or 2. Loretta felt a cold dread seep into her. She had less than $5 to her name. She knew no one. The return passage was an impossible dream. She had burned the bridge back to Ohio the moment she stepped on that train. Hawk seemed to read her thoughts. He let out a long, slow breath, the sound of a man accepting an unwelcome reality. He turned his gaze on Loretta. The anger was gone, replaced by a look of grim practicality. "What was your arrangement with your sister Loretta?" swallowed. "The arrangement was with you, sir. She was to be your wife. I was sent in her stead. And you agreed to this?" "My family is not in a good position," she said, the understatement hanging in the stale air. It was seen as the only option. Hawk was silent for a long moment, studying her. She met his gaze without flinching. She had nothing left to lose by being honest. He wasn't looking at her as a potential bride, but as a problem to be solved. He was a rancher, a man who dealt with sick calves, broken fences, and sudden storms. She was just another unforeseen complication. Abernathy Hawk said, turning his attention back to the freight master, "You will send those telegrams. You will find my bull, and you will bear the cost of its return. Am I clear?" Crystal Abernathy squeaked, relieved to have the focus shifted from the woman to the animal. Hawk gave a curt nod, and then looked at Loretta. "Come with me." It wasn't a request. Loretta stood, picked up her satchel, and followed him out of the suffocating office and back into the stark sunlight. He led the way to a sturdy buckboard wagon, hitched to a pair of muscular grey horses. He tossed his own supplies in the back and then turned to her. "Put your bag in," he instructed. He didn't offer to help her up, and she didn't expect him to. She climbed onto the hard wooden seat, her skirts bunching around her ankles. Hawk swung himself up beside her with an easy, athletic movement, and took the reins. With a soft click of his tongue and a flick of the leather straps, the horses leaned into their harnesses, and the wagon lurched forward. They rode in silence, leaving the cluster of false-fronted buildings that constituted Redemption Creek behind them. The vast rolling landscape opened up around them, a sea of golden grass under an impossibly wide blue sky. Distant dark hills shimmered in the heat. It was beautiful and terrifying in its emptiness. "Where are we going?" Loretta finally asked, her voice small against the creak of the wagon and the thud of hooves. "My ranch, Eagle's Rest," he replied without looking at her. "And what is to become of me there?" He was quiet for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. The wagon wheels bumped over a deep rut, jostling them together. His arm brushed hers, and she was surprised by the solid warmth of him. "The next eastbound train is in 9 days," he said, at last, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "When it comes, you will be on it. I will pay your passage back to Ohio." Relief and shame warred within her. He was sending her back. He was a decent man, more decent than she had any right to expect. But going back was its own kind of failure. "I cannot accept your charity, Mr. Hawke. I have no way to repay you. Consider it payment for the inconvenience caused by the loss of my bull," he said dryly. "Until then, you are in a difficult position. A woman alone in Redemption Creek is not a good thing. At my ranch, you will be safe." "And what do I do for 9 days?" He finally turned his head to look at her, his expression unreadable. "My cabin is small. I have no cook and no housekeeper. I eat what I can cook, and the place is clean enough for one man. It is not fit for a guest. You will earn your keep. You can cook and clean. In return, you will have a roof over your head and food in your belly. At the end of the 9 days, we will part ways. It is a business arrangement." Loretta nodded slowly. A housekeeper. It was a role she understood. It was a fair, practical bargain. It was devoid of all the messy, complicated emotions of her intended purpose here. "That is acceptable," she said. "Good." The conversation was clearly over. He turned his attention back to the horses, and they fell into silence once more. The ride stretched into hours. The sun beat down, and Loretta felt a trickle of sweat run down her back. Hawke seemed unaffected by the heat. He was a part of this landscape, his posture relaxed but alert, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. She took the opportunity to study him more closely. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps not yet 30. There were lines of care around his eyes, but his face was not hard. It was watchful. He was a man who lived by his wits and his strength, and he kept his thoughts carefully guarded. Finally, as the sun began to slant toward the west, he guided the horses off the main track and toward a rising bluff. They rounded a stand of cottonwood trees, clinging to the bank of a shallow, fast-running creek, and she saw it. Eagle's Rest wasn't a grand ranch house. It was a small, sturdy cabin built of hand-hewn logs with a stone chimney at one end and a low-slung porch at the front. A well-built corral stood nearby, holding a half-dozen horses that raised their heads as the wagon approached. A small barn and a chicken coop completed the homestead. It was modest, isolated, but meticulously cared for. The fences were straight, the tools by the barn were neatly stacked. This was the work of a man who took pride in what he had built. Hawke pulled the wagon to a halt near the porch. "We're here." He swung down and began unhitching the team. Loretta climbed down more slowly, her legs stiff from the long ride. She looked at the cabin that was to be her temporary prison, her sanctuary. Inside, a 9-day countdown to her return journey in shame had already begun. Hawke led the horses to the trough to drink. "The well water is sweet," he called over his shoulder. "The inside. You will see for yourself. There is a small cot in the corner." That will be yours. I sleep in the loft. You will have your privacy. He was all business. A man making the best of a bad situation. Loretta took a deep breath of the clean, sage-scented air. She had agreed to be a housekeeper. She would be the best housekeeper this man had ever seen. For 9 days, she would work until her fingers were raw. She would earn her passage, and she would earn his respect. It was all she had left. She picked up her satchel and walked toward the cabin door toward the start of her precarious bargain. The first 3 days at Eagle's Rest passed in a haze of relentless work and thick, watchful silence. The cabin, as Hawk had warned, was a man's space. It consisted of a single large room, dominated by a stone fireplace used for both heating and cooking. A rough-hewn table and 2 chairs sat in the center. In one corner was a narrow cot, which Loretta immediately claimed, and in the other, a collection of saddles and leatherworking tools. A steep ladder led to the sleeping loft. It was sparse, but it was solid. Loretta set to work with a furious energy, born of desperation and pride. She scrubbed the floorboards until the wood grain shone. She washed the few curtains until they were crisp and white. She aired out the bedding, patched Hawk's work shirts, and organized the chaotic shelves of tinned goods and supplies. And she cooked. The first night she had prepared a simple meal of beans and salted pork, the same fare Hawk likely made for himself. He ate it without comment. The second night she found a small patch of wild onions and herbs growing by the creek and a forgotten sack of potatoes. She made a thick, savory stew and baked a pan of surprisingly light biscuits in the Dutch oven. When Hawk came in from his long day of mending fences, he stopped just inside the door, the aroma hitting him. He looked at the stew bubbling over the fire at the neatly set table, at the general air of order that had settled over his chaotic bachelor's home. For the first time, a flicker of something other than grim practicality crossed his face. He washed his hands and face in the basin on the porch, as was his habit, and sat down at the table. Loretta served him a bowl of the stew. He took a bite, then another. He ate the entire bowl and 2 biscuits before he spoke. "This is good," he said, his voice quiet. "It is simple fare," Loretta replied, not looking at him. "It is good," he repeated, and for him it was a speech. They rarely spoke. Their communication was a silent dance of shared space. He would rise before dawn, his movements quiet, as he descended the ladder from the loft. He would already have the fire going by the time she was awake. They would eat breakfast in silence, and then he would be gone for the day, riding the vast expanses of his land, checking on his cattle, living the solitary life he had built. Loretta would work in the cabin and the small garden, her thoughts, her only companions. The silence was a weight, but it was also a shield. It kept the awkwardness of their situation at bay. On the 4th day, the silence was broken. "We need supplies," Hawk announced at breakfast. "Flour and salt are low. And I need to speak to Abernathy about my bull." He paused. "You will come with me." Loretta's heart gave a nervous flutter. "Is that necessary? I am fine here. I will be gone all day." "It is not safe for you to be here alone," he stated. It was a simple fact, not a suggestion. There are men who ride these hills who are not my friends. You will be safer in town. The thought of facing the people of Redemption Creek, of the whispers and stares she was sure to receive, was daunting. But the thought of being left alone in this vast wilderness was even more frightening. Very well, she agreed. The ride to town was as silent as their first journey, but the quality of the silence had changed. It was less tense, more familiar. Loretta found herself noticing the details of the land, the way a hawk circled high overhead, the purple blush of wildflowers in a shallow ravine, the sheer imposing beauty of the Black Hills, rising in the distance. Redemption Creek was busier than it had been on her arrival. Several wagons were hitched outside the general store, and a group of rough-looking men loitered on the porch of the saloon, their voices loud and their gazes sharp. As Hawk pulled the buckboard to a stop, every head turned. Conversations faltered, eyes narrowed. Loretta felt a blush creep up her neck as she climbed down from the wagon. She was intensely aware of Hawk's presence beside her, of his native heritage that was so clearly a mark against him in this town, and of herself, the strange woman who had arrived on his arm, so to speak. Hawk seemed oblivious to the stares, or perhaps he was just used to them. He moved with the same unhurried confidence as he did on his own land. "I will go to the freight office," he told her. "You get the supplies. Here is a list." He handed her a piece of paper and a small leather pouch of coins. "Meet me back here in an hour." He strode off toward the station without a backward glance. Loretta, left alone, took a deep breath and walked toward the entrance of the general store. The group of men from the saloon porch watched her every step, their murmurs following her like biting flies. Inside the store was a jumble of smells, coffee leather and salted fish. The proprietor, a thin, sallow man named Mr. Finch, peered at her over his spectacles. "Help you, ma'am?" he asked, his tone laced with suspicion. "I need flour, salt, coffee, and a few other items," Loretta said, handing him the list. Finch's eyes flicked over the list, then back to her. "This is for Hawk's place, ain't it?" "Yes." A woman at the far end of the counter, who was inspecting a bolt of calico, turned around. She was a stout woman, with a pinched face and accusing eyes. "You're the one," she said, her voice carrying across the store, "the one who came in on the train for him." Loretta's face burned. "I am here on business, ma'am." "Business?" The woman scoffed. "We all know what kind of business a woman has with a man like that. Living out there in sin. It's a disgrace." Mr. Finch began measuring out the flour, his movements deliberately slow, as if enjoying the confrontation. "My arrangement with Mr. Hawk is a private matter," Loretta said, her voice tight. "Not so private when you flaunt it in the town square," the woman retorted. "Our sheriff ought to do something about it." Just then, the door swung open, and a man entered who seemed to suck the very air from the room. He was a large, imposing figure with a florid face and a finely tailored suit that seemed out of place in the dusty town. A thick, silver mustache sat above a smug mouth. His eyes, small and calculating, immediately landed on Loretta. Well, he drawled, his voice a rich baritone. The talk of the town. "Bartholomew Corbin at your service, ma'am." He tipped his hat, but his smile was predatory. "Don't you pay any mind to Martha here. She's just jealous of youth and opportunity." He gave Loretta a look that made her skin crawl. Corbin was the owner of the largest ranch in the territory. The Diamond Sea Hawk had mentioned his name once, in passing, his tone clipped and dismissive. "Mr. Corbin," Loretta said, inclining her head slightly. She wanted nothing more than to take her supplies and leave. Corbin leaned against the counter, blocking her path. It takes a brave woman to throw her lot in with a man like Hawk. A half-breed, scratching out a living on land that ought to belong to better men. Tell me, is he as wild at home as his blood would suggest? The insult was so direct, so venomous, that Loretta was momentarily stunned into silence. The pinched-faced woman, Martha, tittered. Mr. Finch looked down at his scales, a faint smirk on his lips. In that moment, Loretta understood the full scope of what Hawk faced every day. It wasn't just suspicion, it was a deep, festering hatred. And now she was associated with it. Her temper, usually held in tight reserve, snapped. "Mr. Hawk," she said, her voice ringing with cold fury, "is a gentleman, which is more than I can say for the company I am currently keeping. He is an honest rancher, who works harder in a day than you likely have in your entire life, Mr. Corbin, and I would thank you to keep your foul opinions to yourself." The store fell silent. Corbin's smile vanished, his eyes turning to icy slits. "A fiery little thing," he hissed. "You'll learn your place soon enough. Both of you." He pushed himself off the counter and stormed out of the store. Loretta stood trembling, her heart pounding in her chest. Mr. Finch hastily finished bagging her supplies, his face pale. He pushed them across the counter without a word. Loretta paid him her hands, shaking, and fled the oppressive atmosphere of the store. She found Hawk waiting by the wagon, his face a thunderous mask. He had clearly heard the entire exchange. He took the bags from her without a word, stowed them in the back, and helped her onto the seat. As they rode out of town, the silence was heavier than ever before. Loretta stared at her tightly clasped hands, ashamed of her outburst, terrified of the enemy she had just made. "You should not have done that," Hawk said, finally, his voice rough. "He was insulting you." She defended herself. "He was a vile man. He is a dangerous man," Hawk corrected her. "Bartholomew Corbin wants my land. He has wanted it since I first filed the claim. He uses my blood as an excuse to rally the town against me. He was trying to provoke me. By defending me, you have made yourself his target as well." "I'm sorry," she whispered. He was quiet for a long time as the wagon rattled onward. "No," he said at last, surprising her. "Do not be sorry." He turned his head and met her eyes, and for the first time, she saw something beyond the watchful guard he kept up. It was a flicker of gratitude, of respect. "No one has ever spoken for me in that town. Not once." The admission hung between them, a fragile bridge built in the wake of a shared animosity. Loretta realized that their precarious bargain had shifted. They were no longer just a rancher and his temporary housekeeper. They were allies bound together against the whispers of Redemption Creek. The confrontation in town changed things. A subtle thread of companionship began to weave itself into the fabric of their silent cohabitation. They were still a man and a woman in a deeply unconventional situation, but now they were a man and a woman who had faced a common enemy. The walls of Hawk's formidable reserve began to show the faintest of cracks, and Loretta in turn felt the tight knot of her own secrets begin to loosen. The evenings became a time of quiet revelation. After the supper dishes were washed and stacked, they would sit at the table, the warm glow of the kerosene lamp pushing back the vast dark emptiness of the plains outside. The first time Loretta spoke of her past, the words came haltingly, as if she were pulling them from a deep well of shame. Rosalie was always the one she began one evening, her hands busy mending a tear in a grain sack. She could charm a bird from a tree. Father, he doted on her. After Mother passed, she was the light of his life. Hawk was sharpening a knife on a whetstone, the rhythmic shh, shh of steel on stone, a steady counterpoint to her voice. He didn't look up, but she knew he was listening. Our farm in Ohio was failing. She continued the memories, vivid and painful. The soil was tired, and Father's spirit was tired with it. He fell into debt with a man who was not patient. When the advertisement for a wife was answered, it seemed like a miracle. A new start for Rosalie, and the money Mr. Corbin sent for her passage would be enough to appease the creditors to give Father some breathing room. Corbin Hawk's hands stopped their work. His head came up, his dark eyes sharp and focused. "Bartholomew Corbin paid for your sister's passage." Loretta looked up, confused. Yes, that was the name on the bank draft. He was sponsoring a number of brides for men in the territory, or so the letter said. A philanthropic gesture. A cold, hard look settled on Hawk's face. He set the knife and stone down on the table with a quiet click. Corbin does nothing that does not benefit him. He is not a philanthropist. He is a spider. He has been trying to force me off this land for 2 years. Legal challenges, rustling a few head of cattle here and there, poisoning the well of public opinion. Nothing has worked. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense. Think Loretta. An unexpected woman arrives, claiming to be my bride. A woman of moral ambiguity in the town's eyes. She lives with me unwed. It creates a scandal. It gives men like Corbin ammunition. It makes me look unstable, immoral. It gives the land commissioner a reason to review my claim. Corbin didn't make a mistake. He didn't get the orders mixed up. He arranged this. The blood drained from Loretta's face. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. It wasn't a simple mix-up by a bumbling freight master. Abernathy was likely on Corbin's payroll. Her arrival, her very existence here, was a weapon intended to be used against Hawk. She and her family, in their desperation, had been nothing more than pawns in a rich man's cruel game. He sent for Rosalie, expecting a beautiful, perhaps naive young woman who could be easily manipulated, or whose presence would be even more scandalous. Hawk continued his voice, a low, angry rumble. And instead, he looked at her sensible dress and capable hands. He got you. A disappointment in every regard, Loretta said the words, bitter. No Hawk countered his voice, firm. You are not easily manipulated. You spoke back to him. You are not what he ordered, Loretta. And that may be the only thing that has saved this situation from becoming a complete disaster. The revelation left Loretta shaken. She felt used, discarded, a tool in a fight she hadn't even known existed. The anger she had felt in the general store returned tenfold. Anger at Corbin, at her flighty sister, at her desperate father, and at her own gullible hope. Seeing the turmoil on her face, Hawk did something unexpected. He began to speak of his own past, his voice losing its customary clipped tone and taking on a softer, more somber cadence. My mother was Lakota, he said, his eyes looking past Loretta toward the darkened window. She was a strong woman. She saw the world changing, the buffalo vanishing, her people being forced onto reservations. She believed the only way to survive was to learn the white man's ways to walk in his world. My father was a fur trader, a white man from the east named William Kane. He was different from the others. He respected the Lakota, learned their language. He and my mother, they fell in love. It was not an easy thing for either of them. Her people saw her as a traitor. His people saw him as a squaw man. He picked up the knife again, but only held it, his thumb, stroking the smooth wooden handle. They tried to build a life between two worlds. But there is no space between them. There is only a line, and you are always on the wrong side of it. When my father was killed, a dispute over pelts with some whiskey runners, my mother was left alone. The traders wouldn't help her, and her own people were wary of her half-blood son. She took me, and we lived on the fringes of the reservation. She taught me her language and her beliefs, but she also made me learn English, made me learn to read and write. She said, "You have 2 bloods in you. You must have 2 strengths." When she died of a fever, I was 16. I was truly alone. I worked odd jobs, broke horses for the army, scouted for wagon trains. I saved every penny. I learned the white man's law about land. This piece of ground, Eagle's Rest. This was her dream. A place that was ours. A place where we didn't have to belong to one world or the other, but could make our own. I filed the claim, built this cabin with my own hands. I bought my first cattle. For 5 years I have worked this land, and for 5 years, men like Corbin have tried to take it from me, because they cannot stand to see a man with my mother's blood succeed." He fell silent. The fire crackled in the hearth. In the space of an hour, the entire landscape of their relationship had been redrawn. He was no longer just Hawk, the stoic rancher. He was William Kane's son, a man fighting a lonely war for his mother's dream. And she was no longer just Loretta Dunn, the misplaced mail-order bride. She was a woman who had been unwittingly thrust onto the front lines of that war. She looked at his strong hands, at the lines of exhaustion and determination on his face. She thought of his quiet decency, paying for her passage home, even when he believed she was just a mistake. She thought of how he had defended her right to be safe on his ranch, and she thought of his quiet, simple praise for her cooking, the first real praise she had felt in a very long time. The 9 days no longer seemed like a countdown to escape. They felt like borrowed time in a place she was only just beginning to understand, with a man she was only just beginning to see. The shadow of her past had led her here into the shadow of his, and in that shared darkness, a fragile understanding was beginning to take root. The knowledge that her presence was a calculated part of Bartholomew Corbin's scheme settled like a stone in Loretta's stomach. It twisted her shame into a hard knot of anger, and a surprising fierce protectiveness of Hawk and the life he had carved out of this unforgiving land. The days took on a new urgency. Her work was no longer about earning her passage. It was about fortifying a home under siege. Hawk, too, was changed by their shared confidence. He became more communicative, not with idle chatter, but with purpose. He started explaining the rhythms of the ranch to her. He showed her which plants in her garden were struggling, and how to spot a shift in the weather by the clouds gathering over the black hills, how to distinguish the tracks of a wolf from those of a coyote. He was teaching her, she realized, not as a temporary housekeeper, but as a partner would need to know. One morning he rode out early, his expression grimmer than usual. "I'm checking the north pasture," he told her, pulling on his gloves. "The herd's been restless. Stay close to the cabin. Keep the rifle loaded." The request sent a chill down her spine, but she nodded, her face set with determination. She spent the morning on edge, her ears straining for any unusual sound over the whisper of the wind. She was churning butter on the porch when she heard it, a low, distressed moaning from the direction of the creek that fed their well. Setting the churn aside, she picked up the heavy rifle that leaned against the cabin door. It felt foreign and deadly in her hands. Hawk had shown her how to load and fire it one afternoon, his instructions patient and precise. "You never point it at anything you don't intend to kill," he'd said. Holding the rifle in a way she hoped was correct, she moved cautiously toward the sound. The cottonwood trees by the creek offered some cover. As she drew closer, the smell hit her first, a foul chemical odor that burned her nostrils. Then she saw it. One of Hawk's cows was down, lying on its side, in the shallow water, its body convulsing in its final throes. The water around it had a milky, unnatural sheen. Loretta's blood ran cold. The well. The creek fed their well, their only source of fresh water, for themselves and the animals. She raced back to the cabin, her heart pounding against her ribs. She lowered the bucket into the well and drew it up. The water that was normally so clear and sweet was cloudy and carried the same vile chemical smell. Poison. Corbin wasn't just spreading rumors anymore. He was escalating his attack, striking at the very lifeblood of the ranch. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but she forced it down. What would Hawk do? He wouldn't panic. He would assess, and he would act. The animals in the corral needed water. She needed water for the evening meal. They couldn't touch the well. Her eyes scanned the property and landed on the rain barrel at the corner of the cabin. It was only a quarter full from a shower the previous week, but it was clean. It wouldn't be enough for the horses for long, but it was a start. She began hauling buckets from the barrel to the trough, her muscles straining. When Hawk returned at midday, he saw her immediately, her dress stained with sweat and dirt, her face grim, as she poured the last of the rain barrel water into the trough. He saw the empty well bucket sitting on the ground and spurred his horse forward, his face a thunderous mask. He dismounted before the horse even came to a full stop. What happened? "The creek," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "One of the cows is dead in the water. It smells of chemicals. The well is tainted." Hawk strode to the well, drew a bucket, and sniffed its contents. He swore a single sharp word in his mother's language that was filled with venom. He let the bucket drop back into the darkness. He walked to the creek, his movements tight with fury, and stood for a long moment, looking at the dead animal that was fouling his water source. When he returned, his rage was contained, banked like a furnace, making it all the more terrifying. "Corbin," he said. It was a statement of fact. "What do we do?" Loretta asked. "The horses." "There's a spring-fed pool about 2 miles east," he said, his mind already working, calculating. "It's a long haul, but the water's clean. We'll have to drive the horses there every day and haul water back for ourselves. It will take hours I should be spending watching the rest of the herd." He looked at her at the rifle still leaning against the porch. "He did this today because he knew I was in the north pasture. He knew you were here alone." The implication was clear. Corbin had not only attacked his ranch, he had endangered her. The thought sent a fresh wave of cold fury through him. "This is my fault," Loretta whispered. "My being here. It pushed him to this." "No," Hawk said, his voice hard as iron. "This is Corbin's fault. He is the one who will pay for it." He looked at the setting sun. "We have to get that cow out of the creek before it bloats and putrefies any further. It's going to be a long night." What followed was the hardest physical labor Loretta had ever known. Under the cold light of a rising moon, they worked together. Hawk waded into the contaminated stream and tied ropes around the dead animal. He brought his strongest workhorse, and together they strained and pulled the horse, groaning, the ropes creaking, until the heavy carcass was dragged onto the bank. The work was gruesome and exhausting. Loretta didn't flinch. She pulled when Hawk told her to pull. She braced when he told her to brace. She was no longer a housekeeper. She was a ranch hand, a partner in a desperate struggle for survival. By the time they were done, they were both bone-weary and covered in filth. They used the last of the clean water from her earlier hauling to wash their hands and faces. Inside the cabin, the lamp cast long dancing shadows. Loretta moved automatically to prepare a cold meal of bread and dried meat, but her hands were shaking with exhaustion. Hawk stopped her, placing a hand gently on her arm. It was the first time he had touched her with anything other than accidental contact. The touch was firm, steady, and sent a jolt through her. "Sit," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "You've done enough." He took the bread and knife himself and cut 2 thick slices. He poured them both a cup of the precious clean water. They ate in silence the shared ordeal, a heavy presence in the small room. The attack, which was meant to drive them apart, to break Hawk's spirit, had done the opposite. It had forged a bond between them, a bond tempered in foul water and shared labor under a cold moon. "He will not win Loretta," Hawk said, his voice a low vow. "This is my home. He will not drive me from it." Loretta looked across the table at him, at the stubborn pride in his jaw, the fierce light in his eyes. She believed him, and she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her soul that she would not be leaving on the train in 3 days' time. Her place was here. This fight was now her fight, too. The breaking point came one evening as Loretta returned with the water wagon. Bartholomew Corbin and 2 of his men blocked her path, his face a smug mask in the twilight. He revealed his endgame. He'd filed a complaint with the land commissioner about a half-breed living in sin. He sneered, "It's a morals charge that will cost him this claim." He then offered her a deal: testify that Hawke held her against her will, and Corbin would see she was well cared for. Loretta's fear was eclipsed by a cold fury. "I would rather die," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Wrong answer," Corbin snarled, but before his man could move, a low voice cut through the air. "That's far enough." Hawke stepped from the shadows, a rifle held with deadly calm. The standoff was brief and silent. Faced with Hawke's unshakable resolve, Corbin and his men retreated into the darkness, spitting threats. In the quiet that followed, Hawke helped a trembling Loretta from the wagon. He held her steady, his touch protective. "He was right," Hawke admitted, his voice rough. "A morals charge is the one thing I can't fight." He looked down at her, his gaze intense. "When you arrived, I told you that you were not what I ordered." The memory stung, but he continued, his voice softening. "I was wrong. I thought I needed an asset for my ranch. What I needed was you. You are brave and strong. You have stood with me." He took her calloused hand in his. "I am not offering you a life of ease. I am offering you a fight, Loretta Dunn. I am asking you to be my wife." It was a proposal forged in hardship and mutual respect, the most real thing she had ever known. Tears filled her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." Their wedding was not an affair for the town of Redemption Creek, but for the land itself. They rode north to meet an elder named Stone, a friend of Hawke's mother, whose wisdom was as ancient as the hills. Beside a clear running stream under the gaze of a circling eagle, their ceremony unfolded. There were no rings. Hawke tied a single eagle feather into Loretta's hair. She in turn tied a soft leather braid she had made around his wrist. Stone spoke a few words in his native tongue before looking at them with his knowing eyes. "You have been stones standing alone against the wind," he said in English. "Now you will be a wall, stronger together." And with that, they were husband and wife. The test of that wall came a week later. The land commissioner, Mr. Davies, arrived with Sheriff Miller in tow to investigate Bartholomew Corbin's complaint. They found Hawke mending a harness on the porch and Loretta inside, the scent of baking bread wafting from the clean, orderly cabin. Mr. Hawke Davies began, his tone severe. "I'm here about a complaint regarding your living situation." Hawke rose, his demeanor calm and solid. "My wife and I would be happy to answer your questions," he said, gesturing to Loretta, who came to the doorway wiping flour from her hands. "Commissioner, allow me to introduce Mrs. Kane." He had taken his father's surname for the official record, another anchor in the white man's world. The commissioner was visibly startled. He looked from Hawke's resolute face to Loretta's quiet strength, taking in her work-roughened hands and the feather still tied in her hair. This was not the scandalous scene Corbin had described. This was a homestead. The complaint was filed by a man who wants my land. Hawke stated plainly. "We were married last week. Sheriff Miller knows the elder who witnessed it." The sheriff gave a curt nod. "Stone's word is solid." Davies could see the truth. The complaint was a malicious lie. He saw the evidence of their shared, back-breaking labor and the undeniable partnership between them. His investigation was over before it truly began. "Your claim appears to be in order, Mr. and Mrs. Kane," he concluded. As he left, Sheriff Miller paused. "Digging that new well is hard work," he said to Hawk. "Let me know if you need an extra shovel on my day off." It was a small gesture, but it was a monumental shift. Corbin's gambit had failed completely. He had sent a pawn and inadvertently delivered a queen. Loretta was not the weapon that would destroy Hawk. She was the foundation upon which he would build his future. Life was never easy, but they faced the harsh winters and dry summers together. They dug the new well, recovered the bull, and slowly the cabin became a home. They never sought popularity in Redemption Creek, but they earned something more valuable: respect. They were the Canes of Eagle's Rest, a testament that sometimes the best things in life are the things you never thought to order. From the dust of a train station, misunderstanding a story of incredible resilience was born. Hawk and Loretta's journey wasn't a fairy tale. It was a testament to the rugged partnerships forged in the crucible of the American West. They were two strangers thrown together by a cruel scheme, who found in each other not what they thought they wanted, but exactly what they needed to survive. Their love story wasn't written in whispered sonnets, but in the shared labor of digging a well, the quiet understanding across a supper table, and the unified strength of standing together against hatred and greed. They prove that a true home isn't just a piece of land, but a fortress you build with the one person who has your back. If their story of resilience and unexpected love moved you, please give this video a like, as it truly helps our channel grow. Share it with someone who loves a good old-fashioned tale of the West, and be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell so you don't miss our next story from the pages of history.